Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the ZX81, aka Timex Sinclair 1000. This computer has the distinction of being the least expensive, complete, ready to go, plug into your TV and get up and working 8-bit computer that was ever sold. In 1982, when this thing launched, it was only $100, which was absolutely mind-blowing for how cheap it is. But to get that cheap, Sinclair had to cut some major corners, one of which, of course, is the keyboard. This computer does not have a good reputation for being a very good computer and a very functional computer because of all the corners that had to be cut on it. So because of that, a lot of people bought these things, played around with it a little bit, realized they liked computers, but they want something a bit better, so then they put this aside and went out and bought something else like a Commodore or an Atari, which were definitely more expensive, but far, far more capable. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at 3 of these computers. I happen to have 3 handy. I want to see if all of these work. If not, we're going to have to do some repairs to get them up and running. And if we get them up and running, then I want to do some gaming on it. Because, of course, what do we want to do with old computers? We want to play some games on it. I had a VIC-20 as my first computer in 1982. I knew some people who had these computers, and I remember thinking, well, compared to my VIC-20, it's pretty terrible. And a lot of that comes down to this keyboard. But we have to remember that I think when this thing came out, it was like half the price or more than half the price of the VIC-20, which was pretty substantial if you were just trying to get your feet wet in computers. So in this video, I hope to give these machines a little bit of love, and maybe I'll change my opinion on these machines after using them for a little bit. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So today we're going to be looking at 3 of these ZX81s. Now this one here came from a local viewer, John, and I put a question mark because I just don't know anything about this machine, if it works or not. Interesting about this particular unit versus these two is that this one is branded Sinclair ZX81, while these other 2 are the more standard for North America Timex Sinclair 1000. In North America, Sinclair was unknown, but Timex was a bit more of a well-known brand. So I think that they went with the Timex branding on these machines simply because that was more recognizable to people. And we take a look at the Sinclair branded ZX81, you might think this is actually just an imported unit, but you can see here that that is definitely not the case. It says ZX81 USA, made in England. Funny thing is, it says FCC identification data, but nowhere on here is there actually an FCC ID. And for my reading as well, it's the North American or NTSC machines that had the RF jack on the rear of the machine or towards the rear of the machine. And it was PAL regions where the RF jack was in this square right there, where they have actually, you know, this is not just a plug that was installed after the fact. This was in the molding itself. But let's take a look at these other machines. I bet you that plug is not going to be there because they are later productions. And yep, indeed, you can see that there is a difference there. Let's see about this one. Yep, same thing. So it's only the Sinclair branded one that, well, must be an early machine that has the plug, so to speak, but everything else seems to be identical. Now, odd is that there is a serial number sticker, model 330, but the Sinclair branded one does not have it. And the embossed Sinclair writing is not on these later ones. This one says it's made in France. This one says it's made in Portugal. They do look basically identical, but there of course are subtle differences. Take a look at the silk screen for the channel indicators. This one is raised up a little bit further. I'm looking at the keyboards on these. They do appear to be identical across all 3. Obviously on the top side, the other difference is this has like a recessed spot for the sticker, while this has the embossed Sinclair logo and ZX81, which they took off the later North American models. Now, if anyone knows when the ZX81 stopped being sold as the ZX81 and switched over to the Timex Sinclair 1000 for the North American market, I'd be certainly curious to know. Now, I did find a magazine advertisement from October 1982 for the Sinclair ZX81 here in North America. So at least at that point, it seems they were selling this version for $99. And I have a newspaper insert from the Oregonian, the local Portland newspaper, that was selling the Timex Sinclair 1000 for $49 in some of the advertisements in June of 1983. So I don't think it was long after October when they stopped selling this branded one and switched to this. But I'd really be curious to know how long were they selling the ZX81 in the NTSC variant here in North America as the Sinclair ZX81. From my understanding, there are multiple revisions of the motherboards that were used on these. And we'll be able to open these up and maybe tell from the way they look which is which. But I have a feeling in North America, the first ones that were being sold were issue 3, based on what I've read at least. Now you'll notice on the bench, I do have a user's manual for the Timex Sinclair 1000. And opening the manual has this little insert here that says that there are certain televisions which are incompatible with the Timex Sinclair 1000. As is typical for 1980s computer manuals, they're quite comprehensive. They tell you how to hook it up, of course, but then right away they tell you how to start programming the machine in BASIC. And there probably are technical sections too, like for those who understand BASIC. And then a little technical section on how the computer works. Look at that. That's pretty cool, actually. And what you can see here is, before we even open these, how basic the Timex Sinclair 1000 or ZX81 is. We have 1K of RAM, a Z80 CPU, the ULA, the uncommitted logic array. It essentially takes all those TTL chips you might find on other machines, including the video circuitry, and it's all condensed into this one IC, and a ROM, which I think is 4K or 8K. Because this machine has just SRAM, it doesn't have DRAM, it doesn't even need to have minus voltage rails. This thing just runs on 5 volts. And I'm just noticing here, the ULA is labeled SCL, the workhorse. Now, if these chips die, of course, the machine is more difficult to repair. There probably are modern replacements of this chip nowadays, but of course, back in the day, if that chip did fail, you had to replace it, and your machine would be completely dead until you did get a new replacement. The date on this manual, incidentally, 1982. So that would be at the same time they were selling the ZX81. And I have to imagine, if you bought this computer, you didn't get this Timex branded manual, you got one that matched this. Maybe you just got the regular UK variant. Now, as I just mentioned, these machines have only 1 kilobyte of RAM, and part of the issue is that the screen buffer itself takes up a bunch of that RAM, so you have very little RAM available for any programs. Therefore, you really needed a RAM expansion to do anything on these machines, and I happen to have 3 such RAM expansions, 2 Timex branded ones and a Sinclair branded one. And the funny thing is about the one here from Sinclair is it actually says ZX USA 16K RAM, made in England. I'm wondering if that's because this has additional FCC shielding, hence this stuff right here, and the ones sold in the UK did not. The 2 from Timex are 1016s, which means they are 16 kilobyte RAM expansion modules. And looking at the back, they are both made in Portugal. They have slightly different silkscreen writing, but the FCC ID is identical on both of them. Again, it's kind of funny that the one from Sinclair doesn't actually have the FCC ID on it. It just says identification data. Feels like they maybe hadn't passed their full testing yet or something. I don't really know how you can go ahead and sell stuff without an FCC ID actually written on it if it is certified. Now, what's interesting about these RAM expansion modules, I think they were relatively expensive. These do have 16 kilobytes of DRAM in them, and because it's using 4116s, as far as I'm aware, it needs to have some additional DC to DC converters to take the 5 volts and convert it to 12 volts and minus 5 volts. So these are kind of complex things. I think these were a relatively expensive upgrade. And another thing that these RAM expansions were super notorious for is that the expansion connector on the back is not gold plated, and therefore these just connect in like so. And they were notorious that if you accidentally bumped them, the computer would just crash and you would lose your entire program, which you had typed in on this wonderful, and I'm being facetious, keyboard that is on these things. This thing is like typing on a microwave oven, and it's pretty darn horrible. And I feel it was the keyboard on the ZX81 that was the Achilles heel of this computer. In the end, when this thing was $49, the VIC-20 was only $79. And which would you rather have? Something with a really nice keyboard, plus color and sound and whatnot, versus this machine that was just monochrome, no sound, and then an absolutely horrible keyboard, plus only 1 kilobyte of RAM. VIC-20 was very skimpy on the RAM with 5K, but 5K was a lot more usable than the tiny amount of RAM, the fraction of a K you had available to you once this thing was actually booted up. Just a really quick note while editing, a viewer sent me a Kmart ad from August of 1983, and the computer had already dropped to $29.97 and $33 for the RAM expansions. The price was dropping fast on the Timex Sinclair 1000, but it was on all the other machines as well. With all that said, a lot of these machines did make their way into people's homes, and they were the first exposure that people had to computers. It might not have been something they used for very long before they realized they wanted something better, but it allowed people to get their feet wet and realize that computers were fun. So while these machines are dismissed by a lot of people, I think they're still important from a historical perspective because they probably introduced computing to a lot of people. So with that intro out of the way, Let's see if these three Timex Sinclair 1000/ZX81s actually work, and if they don't, it's time for a little bit of a repair. So the first issue we're going to run into with these is getting them hooked up to something where we can do video capture. It's quite possible that younger people might buy one of these at a thrift store thinking, wow, this is an old looking computer, very odd looking, try to hook it up to their television or monitor and get no image because they might think this is composite video. It does just say TV. So for testing purposes, I'm going to try to get this hooked up to the RGB to HDMI so we can get a nice pixel perfect image. Let's start with this Sinclair ZX81 because this is kind of the rare one, the one I've never seen. And let's see if this thing even shows any signs of life at all. Now, getting into these machines, I think it's relatively easy. Thing you have to watch out for, the keyboard is connected with very thin membrane cables, plugs into the motherboard. So when you pull it apart, you need to make sure that you don't tear that. There we go, so 3 screws under the feet. This thing's already kind of pulling apart. All right, ZX81 experts, is this normal that this has a metallized case? This is obviously for an RF shielding type of thing, and I'm assuming this little bar here, this must be some kind of grounding. Maybe it touches the case right there to create that shielding, which is maybe something to do with the North American variant. I like the red solder mask on the back here. I've heard that the PCB quality is kind of notorious for being not super great. And I have a feeling on the top side there is not going to be any solder mask. Take a look at the expansion connector. You can tell that it's been used. We have witness marks. But yes, this is the cheapest type of connector possible, not gold-plated. Therefore, bad connections with the RAM expansion unit. Okay, so lifting this is where I have to be careful with the keyboard connection. You can see the way that that goes in there. So I'm just going to gently pull this out. Like so. And there we have it. A North American ZX81 motherboard. We have a date code of the second week of 1982 and a part number 2C184E. A 2364 mask ROM from 1981. Looks like there is room for an additional ROM, so you can use a larger one. An NEC Z80 CPU, no visible date code. Interesting that there is space for an IC that wasn't populated. I think that's the same on all of them. And there is our MOSTEC SRAM. Also funny, it looks like it can also accept a larger SRAM on the boards to expand the memory internally, and maybe you need that extra IC to do that. We can see here, Sinclair ZX81 USA Issue 1. And I was thinking that it was going to be an Issue 3 machine, although maybe because this is a USA variant, this is the first variant of the USA model, which is more similar to the Issue 3 in Europe. The RF modulator is going to be a different model for the USA. It does say USA 1 on the silk screen right there. I have a feeling that to do a composite mod, we're going to need to put a transistor in line, a little buffer, and that's because this probably can't drive 75 ohm load over composite video directly. But that's fine. I think we can use the RGB to HDMI because we can disable the 75 ohm termination on its input, which should probably allow this to drive the video signal directly to that device without any issues. You know what, just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to open up these other two machines and let's compare the motherboards. Opening up the second unit, the ZX81 case is in my right hand, and we can see the metallization is a little bit different between the two. Odd as it also has this little like foam block there as well. Right off the bat, we can notice that this second machine, this one is the one that was made in France, is substantially different. It's an Issue 3 motherboard versus Issue 1. And immediately you can notice that the Z80 CPU and the ROM are in different positions, swapped around. And this one has the exact same RF modulator as the other one, but this board seems to be designed to operate anywhere because you have FR, UK, and USA 1. From a date perspective, 52nd week of 1982, first week of 1983, I'm noticing that the Ferranti ULA also has a different part number, 2C210E, and the original ZX81 is a 2C184E. And finally, the machine that's made in Portugal looks to be at least the same layout as the French one. It has cool yellow silkscreen markings, but it also says Issue 3. And date code's 12th week of 1983. Is that 36th week of 1983? This looks like 1982, 52nd week. And for the static RAM, 1983, 48th week. Yeah, pretty late machine, all the way up until close to 1984. Now this is the connection from the keyboard, and this is the Portuguese machine, and that looks pretty nice. And this is the ZX81, that connection seems to be fine. But this is the French machine. Take a look at that. I don't know what happened there. This is the machine that was assembled in France, and I don't see a piece of that inside the connector, so I don't know why that looks like it's broken. I'm also noticing on the Portuguese machine, the thing on the bottom for shielding against the case, broken. All right, so let's start with the original Issue 1 motherboard. This is the one I'm certainly the most curious about. It's probably the most rare, at least here in North America. Power regulation on the ZX81 is a 7805, so the whole board just runs on 5 volts, but typically you're going to use like a 9-volt power supply, and I'm quite sure that the 9-volt power supply does feed directly to the expansion connector for the DC to DC converter in the RAM expansion modules. I took a look at the schematic. I could see that pin 16 on the ULA is the video output, and that's what I'm clipped onto. I have this chip clip attached to it. The oscilloscope is set to 1 volt per division, and as a notorious cost-cutting measure, there is no power switch on this machine. You simply plug the power cable directly into it, and even worse than that, it uses the same type of jack as the headphone and microphone inputs, which means you could accidentally put 9 volts into any of those, which I can't imagine is particularly good. And just taking a look at the bottom case, earphone, microphone, 9 volts DC. So with the power plugged in, hey, we're getting something out of the ULA. That's a good sign. I think we have a working machine. With this zoomed out 5 milliseconds per division, and I have the cursor set up on the pulses, this is 17 milliseconds. Of course, we just don't have a lot of high resolution because I'm zoomed out, but that would imply this is running at 60 hertz because 60 hertz refresh rate is about 16.66 milliseconds. And zooming in, there's a horizontal retrace. It is actually picking that up at 15.53 kilohertz. It's not very accurate, it's 15.6. But yeah, I'm going to say that those little blips are some text. I think when you power this on, it just says Sinclair Research or something at the bottom of the screen, something like that. And when you do see an occasional line that shows up at the bottom, just like that one, that's going to be the vertical retrace that we already looked at before when we were further zoomed out. So this looks like a good video signal. And the fact is, we're getting about 3.3 volts. That means I can just hook this directly up to the RGB to HDMI with the termination disabled, and we should be able to see a video signal. Now, taking a look at RGB to HDMI, I can see that the ZX81 is already in here. Let's just check this out. I've never actually tried this. And we do have sub profiles. We probably have one for 50 and 60. Excellent. So we're going to turn off the auto switching. And we take a look in the sampling menu. This is where we can disable the 75 ohm termination. So let's give this a try. I'm going to have to tweak these values probably to make this work, but we should be able to get at least some kind of image once I hook up the RGB HDMI. And there we have it. With a little bit of adjustment, there's the output of the machine. And it looks good. That's the cursor that's telling you when you push these keys on the keyboard, it enters keywords. So you hit like the G key, and I think it just types out go to. You don't actually type out G-O-T-O, you just push G. I think that's what the K means. So it seems that this old original machine, at least on the surface, appears to work perfectly. Just feeling how hot these chips are. They're pretty warm, but not burning hot. And the heatsink for the voltage regulator, that's hot. We're giving this thing 9 volts from that little power supply, which is a bit excessive, although I guess that's just how these things were designed, so it's probably fine. All right, well, on the surface, this thing appears to be working perfectly. We'll have to do some further testing later. Let's go ahead and test the other two motherboards, see if they're in the same state as this. All right, motherboard number 2. All right, this one does not appear to work. I'm still on the same pin. I have the video cable connected, although it's not connected to the RGB to HDMI, and the scope is plugged in to that same pin right there, and we're just getting kind of a non-functional system. And the final and third motherboard, let's see if this one is working. Well, that was weird. Did something there. Oh, I think we have a bad connection. Okay. That doesn't look like it's working correctly though. I think this power jack might be dirty. What we're looking at here at 10 microseconds represents one scan line. So there we are at 15.6 kilohertz. I'm not seeing the occasional 60 hertz pulses that should be coming by. Not to mention, I think we're going to be looking at a black bar that goes up the left side of the screen once we hook up the video signal. I presume we're going to have a rolling image because there's no vertical sync pulses. Or it's not rolling, it's just solid white, actually. That's interesting. Now, I'm personally not really familiar with the way the ZX81 works, but I do know a couple things. I know the CPU is responsible for generating the video signal. Now, I don't know to what degree. For instance, if the CPU is not running code, do you still get normal sync outputs out of the ULA, or is that entirely CPU driven? If it's entirely CPU driven, that could easily explain why on the number 2 machine here from France, we're getting absolutely no video out of it. Maybe it's not running code, therefore we have no video signal. And as for this third machine, Perhaps it's stuck. The ROM is not running properly. Like it started to initialize the video or stuck in some kind of loop. So we're getting the horizontal sync pulses and a white background, and yet we have no vertical sync pulses and no text on screen. And I'm just writing up the symptoms for the third machine, and we're definitely not getting a vertical sync pulse. So this machine is number 3, and I'm putting 3P because it's made in Portugal, just so I can keep all the parts together. And for number 2F, the French machine, no video. So let's focus on this one first. I'm just going to move everything else off the bench. Let's see if we can get this thing working. If you're familiar with my videos, you know what comes next. We have the split screen open, the virtual bench, oscilloscope open. I got rid of the other one. And we'll be referencing the schematics, which I found online at this website called retroisle.com. Okay, so let's plug the power back in. I'm still plugged into pin 16 on here. This is the one that's showing no video. And sure enough, when I apply power, it just goes up from 0 volts and kind of looks dead. Now, one thing I wanted to try is, let's just try giving these chips, which are in sockets, a little bit of a push. Maybe we're dealing with dodgy sockets. You know what? They are all very, very firmly installed into the sockets. I don't think that's the problem. Just in case we're dealing with a slightly bad connection, I'm going to lift these out of the sockets just so slightly. And that means if there's a little bit of oxide on the pins, pushing them back in, it's going to have the effect of a little bit of a cleaning action. But the good thing about not taking them out fully is that you don't risk bending a pin accidentally, which can definitely be something that can happen, and you won't notice until later when you take it out and look again closely and go, oh, I can't believe I did that, and cost you hours and hours of troubleshooting, when the reality was it was something that you caused and not a fault on the board originally. All right, see if that made any difference. None at all. What we need to do is we need to start looking at some of the signals on this machine, specifically the usual suspects. You're not going to have a working system without good voltage, so 5 volts, a good clock signal to the CPU, and a reset circuit that's working correctly. I can't quite read the markings on this. The scan is pretty low quality. Let's see if we can find something else. So pin out for the Z80, pin 11, 5 volts input. There's pin 11. 5 volts, looks perfect, no excessive ripple, that's what we're looking for if there's a problem with the regulation circuit. The original power supply might be AC input, not DC, not 100% sure. The one that I'm using now is DC though, and it looks fine. Next up is pin 6 for clock. And on pin 6, we're getting nothing, just a solid 5 volts. Therefore, there's no way the CPU could possibly work. And there's really no point to look at anything else like the reset circuit right now because the clock is dead, and therefore we're not going to get a working system. So there's pin 6, the CPU clock. It goes through TR2, and we can see that there is a crystal oscillator X1 on board hooked up to C6. I need to find better schematics for this. It goes to 2 pins on the ULA. 14, I think that's a 14, and 35. That implies that the ULA is actually driving the crystal oscillator. So if the crystal oscillator is not working, it could well be a ULA problem, although easily it could be the crystal oscillator itself or one of these components around it. So look at the other boards, it's easier without the clip. There's X1, it's this little ceramic looking package there, or I guess it's a crystal inside. That's TR2, that's the transistor, and then these other passives that are around it almost certainly are related to the clock circuit. And we're looking at pin 35 on the ULA, nothing. It's the same as the clock signal that's going into the CPU, which is around 5 volts, well, it's around 4.22. And definitely looking at the schematic again, this pin 14, that is the output of the clock signal that drives the base of TR2, which goes to the CPU. And therefore, when I look at pin 14, I just see 0 volts coming out of the ULA. Now, the thing is, looking at pin 35, there's nothing going into the ULA either, so obviously nothing's going in, then nothing could come out. And it almost has me thinking that maybe it is the crystal that is the problem. 6.5 megahertz is actually what's written on the little package that's on the board. I grabbed the third motherboard, the one that's still not working, but it has obviously some kind of clock because we're getting some kind of video signal. And this does have a 3.28 megahertz signal coming out of the ULA. And the input into the ULA is what we're looking at here at 6 point whatever megahertz, and it's weirdly high up, but I guess that's okay for the ULA's clock input. And poking around on the crystal itself, it's a 3-pin package. On the leftmost pin, there's that 6.5-ish megahertz coming out of it. Okay, we're back on the machine with no clock signal. That's the clock input to the ULA. It's just at 4 point whatever volts. And probing on the pins that go to the clock crystal, that's the rightmost pin. That's the middle pin. And that's the leftmost pin, which had oscillation on it with the other one. But this one has absolutely nothing on it. So this has me thinking that it might just be the oscillator that's failed. So we have a couple ways to see if that's the bad component. I can take the one off this, which seems to be working, see if that fixes it. Or I suppose we could remove this from the board and just inject 6.5 megahertz directly into the ULA on that pin 35, see if that brings this machine to life. There's our little component, 6.5 megacycles. So I have the frequency synthesizer set to 6.5 megahertz, and I have set up the offset so it looks similar to the waveform that we saw on the working machine with the little component here. Wow, the one that I think is broken was working, kind of up near the top, 6.5 megahertz. So I have the oscilloscope connected to the video output on the ULA, and with it powered up, it's looking exactly the same as it was before, just sort of doing nothing. And on my little O-ring pick, I have it clipped on to the output of the frequency generator, which is currently off. So I'm going to turn it on now, channel 1, and that did not do anything. Same exact thing. I'm feeding it into the leftmost pin where the crystal oscillator was. Let's see what we see on the output of the frequency generator. I mean, we're seeing what looks like a normal clock signal, but you know what? Looking at pin 35 on the ULA, there's still nothing, even though we're inputting a signal into the board. So I'm just going to be rude and I'm going to feed that directly into pin 35. So we are looking at the video output of the ULA, and I have the pick on the pin 35, which is the input of the clock signal, but the frequency generator is off. Let's turn it on, and that does nothing. That did absolutely nothing. Let's power cycle the machine. Yeah, nothing. Okay, I found another schematic that's a bit more clear. Now it looks like the output of the crystal oscillator goes to C6, and then that goes into pin 35. So I have the oscilloscope connected to pin 35 on the ULA, so currently it's just at 5 volts. The thing is running right now. And I have the output of the generator going into the rightmost pin on the package. That is on the right side of C6, and then pin 35 is where the oscilloscope is. Now if I turn on the signal generator, there is our signal. Now, I have no idea if that is the correct looking signal. So why don't we change the amplitude ever so slightly? I want to see if that actually makes it go up or down. Okay, that does make it increase. I don't really know what it should look like going into the ULA, but I'm at 2 volts peak to peak on the generator, and the amplitude is a little higher. And I am now clipped onto pin 14, which I confirmed is the output of the base drive. This is the clock signal that's coming out of the ULA that goes to the transistor 2, and there's absolutely nothing there. So if we take a look at pin 14 on the board that at least does something, we actually see the 3 point whatever megahertz that goes to the CPU coming out of that. So it kind of makes me feel like the ULA on this board is bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap it with the ULA on the other board. I'm not going to use the one from the working board. I don't want to touch that one since that one is working. The ULA is warm, but it's not burning hot. Pins on the ULA, look okay. I'm going to draw a little question mark on this so we know that this is the one that may not work. So out comes the ULA from the board that at least has a video signal of some kind. Looks perfect. Nothing wrong at all. Clip is back on. If we power this up, the oscilloscope is going to show the output for the CPU, which should be... what? It's something? It's generating something? That makes no sense because there's no master crystal oscillator. I'm going to plug this back in and I'm going to feed the signal that it wants. There it is, 3.25 megahertz. Basically divides it by 2, 6.5. And now that looks totally correct. It's really interesting that even with no input, it actually tries to generate a clock signal. It's just kind of arbitrary. If I turn off the signal generator, sort of jumping all over the place, but turn it back on and it locks right in to 3.25 megahertz. Now, could well be that this little package for the crystal oscillator is still working well. It just wasn't being driven correctly or something like that. All right, let's take a look at the video output and look at that. We see pulses. So we still have this little ledge here, which we didn't see on the issue 1 board, but we absolutely see these little drops there. And that definitely tells me this is probably working perfectly. Now I'm curious, if I remove the clock signal, the machine is, let's see, if I power cycle it and I have no clock signal going into it, it's still actually running. I mean, it's not going to make a video signal that's going to really work properly. It's because it's jumping all over the place. But notice there are little drops there, that's that K for the cursor. So it works even with the wrong frequency going into the clock input pin. That's pretty funny. It's back on again and it looks nice and stable. Okay, we're back on the RGB HDMI. Let's turn on the power to this thing. Now I don't have the signal, the clock going. I just turned it on. That looks like it's working. I'm not super familiar with what diagnostics run at power up for the ZX81. Don't know if it does RAM tests or whatever, but at least it's getting into the basic prompt there. Theoretically, if we plugged in the keyboard, we'd be able to type stuff and it would be working. All right, what I need to do is reinstall this little crystal oscillator package. I'm just gonna hold it in place with my thumb, and let's plug the power back in, see if I have a working system. We do. So this little crystal oscillator package is fine. I guess the way it was being driven by the bad ULA resulted in no output from it, but we have a perfectly stable image right now. And we know that if I don't have this little package installed, if I just pull it out of the board and we plug the power back in, we're gonna get a video signal, but it's gonna jump all over the place. In fact, it's not even syncing to it. Oh, there it is. Okay, RGB HDMI is able to sync to it, but it's obviously jumping all over the place as we saw on the oscilloscope. It's kind of cool in a way that the ZX81 can actually operate with no crystal oscillator, and it generates a good enough clock signal that the CPU works and the video kind of mostly works. That's pretty amazing, actually. I don't know how that's even possible. The oscillator has been reinstalled into the board and we're booted up into basic, stable, perfect image. I'm just going to write on the note here, bad ULA, which as far as we're aware at the moment is the only problem with this number 2 machine. What I can do for sure is mark the bad ULA with an X so we don't mix them up. And this ULA is good, so I'm just going to draw a tick mark on it. But I'm going to remove the ULA from this board and stick it on the other board again so we can do the diagnosis on that machine. So what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned obviously we have a bad ULA and that the ULA drives the oscillator package. So if there's something wrong with the ULA, that can result in no clock signal even going into the ULA. But we've also learned that this is a good ULA and in that other board generates a perfectly good video signal with a vertical retrace sync signal, but we're not seeing that on this machine. That's going to imply to me that that is software generated, so this computer must not be executing any code. Let's just power this back up. And it is working now. So just taking the ULA out and putting it back in has made this one work now. I hadn't reseated any of the ICs on this board. Let's just give them a push. That RAM chip did push down slightly, while the ULA I just pushed into the board. And let's power this back up again. And it just boots right up. So all 3 of these machines appear to be working now. Right, so I need to try to use these machines. Now the problem is, of course, is I can't lay this on top of the motherboard when this clip is on here. So I'm going to need to pick up the video signal off of one of the pins going into the RF modulator using this clip lead. All right, I am on the leftmost pin going into the RF modulator, and that's the signal, and it's 1 volt peak to peak, which is actually perfect for going directly into the RGB to HDMI. But remember, that's without any 75 ohm termination, which I have disabled on the RGB to HDMI. I have a feeling if you try to hook up a normal monitor to this, that signal will be pulled quite far down. And like I said, ultimately, you really should be using a transistor. Now, I didn't actually look at the schematic to see what the video output looks like. Oh, and you know what? Looking at the schematic, the pin I was on, the leftmost pin, going through a voltage divider already and a diode. It says USA only, but UK just goes directly into the RF modulator. I guess the RF modulators require a different signal level going into them. You may also notice that the pin on the ULA is also used for the microphone input. Therefore, when you connect up an input into the ZX and you play a tape, it's going to cause interference on the screen. You're going to like see a visual artifact. Kind of an unusual cost-saving measure there. RGB HDMI has been reset, the termination is disabled, and that is connected to the input to the RF modulator, and we're at about 740 millivolts now. It's still good enough to capture with the RGB to HDMI, but you can see that even with the termination turned off, that brought that signal down a lot. And actually, we're not even getting any image, and this is with the stock profile. I just have to adjust the levels here. All right, that's good enough for now. It's a little bit of static around the K, and that's just because without that transistor buffer on there, it's, well, not a perfect signal. Let's get the keyboard hooked up. Sorry, you can't see what I'm doing. It's very fiddly. Just be very gentle with these cables. If they tear or rip, you do need to get an entire new keyboard membrane. So we are powered back up and the keyboard should be connected. G, oh yes, we're looking good. Let's try to fill the screen with text to help me adjust the settings on the RGB to HDMI to be a little less glitchy. So print ADB, semicolon, whoa, see how it went dark? I think that's normal. That's part of the fact that the CPU is driving the video directly. So you hit G for go to, and then you can type 10. That's why it changed from a K to an L. And now we hit R for run, and we hit enter. Look how slow that is. Wow. Okay, and it pauses automatically. And I'm doing audio calibration, and I think that should give us pixel perfect video now. Yep, there we go, pixel perfect, awesome. Now the question is the keyboard working fully? I think one way to tell is if we do something like print, now I should be able to type every character on the keyboard, or every letter. Okay, that's cool. So when I hit enter, it doesn't take that, and it has a highlighted S there. And what I have no idea how to do is delete the entire line. There's a delete key on the keyboard. That's like backspace, that's Shift 0. Maybe if I push function, clear, nope. Shift enter goes between F and L on the cursor. L was, I think, typing letters in. F is functions. I see clear as a function here, but I hit X and it's just EXP. That's not right. Okay, well, I don't know. So I'm going to just unplug the power because there's no power switch even. Now Shift 9 goes into graphic mode, which I think, oh, I don't know. I thought it would let us type graphic symbols. Oh, there we go. If I hit Shift and the symbol, that's some of the graphic symbols that are available to you. Now, one thing you may be noticing is the CPU on this machine does run at 3.25 megahertz, which is decent for a Z80 CPU. Of course, it's not as efficient as a 6502, but you'll notice how slow the basic interpreter is. And I think it's really just because it's doing double duty. The CPU is busy with the screen update 60 times a second. And I think that makes the effective speed of the Z80 about 1/4 what you would normally get at 3.2 whatever megahertz. So the cost-saving measures that this machine implemented absolutely result in pretty terrible performance. Although it's my understanding that when stuff is really well written and optimized in assembly language, you can get decent performance out of this, but in BASIC, it's really slow. Okay, so very cool. So this keyboard obviously is working perfectly. It came from the number 3 machine, which is not the motherboard we're using. Oh yes, it is actually. I guess this thing is fully operational now. Once I took the ULA off, put it in the other one, and then put it back in this machine, we're good. So because the keyboard is so fragile, I'm not going to unplug it. I'm just going to leave it just like that. But on the note that originally just says no VSync, right there, no VSync, all white, works after ULA reseat. Now it goes without saying, I didn't do any kind of mod on this to add composite video. I'm going to leave this machine completely stock, but what I am going to do is leave this note inside for future archaeology. Put a little sticker on this machine just to let me know that it's stock, and as of March 17, 2025, it's working. As for this machine, it seemed to boot into BASIC when we had a working ULA in there. I don't feel like taking the keyboard off the other one to put the ULA back in here to do further testing. So I wrote, seems to work, boots to BASIC. I mean, that's all the testing I'm really going to do on this thing. All right, back to our issue 1 machine. Let's make sure this is still working. Yes, it looks good. Obviously the levels are slightly different on this, which is why it's glitching out, but you can ignore that for now. We'll fix that once I get the keyboard connected. Okay, let's start with this keyboard. This was from the number 2 machine, the one that Tim sent in, and let's see about dealing with this problem. I'm just gonna use scissors and cut this just slightly to try to get rid of that ragged edge. Okay, I took off just enough so it's not ragged anymore. Okay, well, I'm struggling to get this reconnected. For whatever reason, when I try to push it into these connectors, the grip of these connectors seems very stiff and it kind of bends this. So now this is getting folded up. I'm going to pause the video and try to figure out a way to make this work. And I may even go so far as to just swap these connectors around because these seem to be easier. I think these are the same ones on the other board, and I got the keyboard plugged into that without too much difficulty. All right, this is what I've come up with. I've added little tabs onto the ribbon cables. These are little shiny plastic tabs. I don't know where I got this. I had it sitting on my bench, so I just cut it up and I used some rubber cement to attach it. So hopefully this will do the trick. Rubber cement's pretty good as far as adhesives go. Yeah, that did the trick. I was able to stick that right in. I'll show you in a second once I get this both plugged in. Hopefully that does the trick. Let's see if this thing works. It's not working. The keyboard input does not work. Oh dear. Now, of course, caveats are we don't know if the keyboard input even works on this board. This is the issue 1 board. Now, we also could have a problem with the whole membrane on this number 2 machine. So what I'm going to need to do is plug its original ZX81 keyboard into here, see if that one works, to help us rule out what's going on. Ah, crap. All right, well, you can see what kind of went wrong here. Is this broke again? I have a feeling this particular keyboard membrane probably needs to be replaced. I mean, it was already broken when I pulled it off, and it did it again. Now, as for this one looks like it's in much better shape. I'm still concerned, though, that pushing this into these connectors is going to crumple these up just because this is flimsy and these grip so strongly. So I'm going to try to insert these without the little cards. Oh, you know what? It's actually working. That's going in there. Not sure how many times I'll be able to get it in and out of the connector, but it's actually working. Okay, so let's give this one a try now. Oh, it works. Oh, awesome. Okay. So what's curious is this issue 1 board obviously has different video levels than the other one. There we go. That looks rock solid, doesn't it? Cool. Let's just run this again. Run, enter. Very nice. Oh, there's a little bit of sparkles here and there, but we can ignore that. That's definitely not a problem with the machine. That's just the way I have it hooked up here. Okay, cool. So this keyboard works. So let me just do a print statement here so I can type every key on the keyboard. Make sure everything is working properly here. It looks like everything works flawlessly with this keyboard as well. So it's older, but still works perfectly. Okay, so where does that leave us with these 3 machines? Well, seems that number 1 and number 3 are working perfectly. Number 3, I had to reseat the ULA, and it's number 2 that had the bad ULA and the bad keyboard. So when I originally wrote not working on here, and that was Super Mini Mail Call episode number 63, definitely this machine is a little bit of a basket case and needs some TLC. Now, before anyone offers up a replacement keyboard membrane and replacement ULA for this, if that exists, I don't think it's really necessary because obviously, even in this video, we have 2 working machines, including the rare issue 1 ZX81 USA edition. So I don't think there's really any reason to fix this one specifically other than just kind of designate this as a parts machine. And when I say parts, there's not a whole lot of parts that I would ever need to take off of this, simply because like these SRAM chips are dirt common, as are the CPUs, and then the ROM, you know, I could just make a new one of those anyways, and the rest of the stuff is all just jelly bean components. Now, for anyone else who is working on one of these that has a bad keyboard, pretty sure the way to get these off is use something like a plastic spudger. I think you just sort of start on the corner and you push from the back. You see it's lifting up there. And then you can just peel up the rest of this. And unfortunately, yeah, this ribbon cable was on its last legs because it's definitely tearing. And there is the machine ready to accept the replacement keyboard membrane. When you get the new one, you just feed the ribbon cables through, peel off the backing, and then stick it back on there. I don't really know why these fail, although check this out. See the discoloration? It actually is on the end and in this area right where it tore. So that must be moisture ingress or corrosion or something like that. You can see this one has it as well. So yeah, this keyboard, I guess, is just bad. And people are probably gonna ask if you can solder wires onto this. This is all plastic. There is no way you could apply enough heat to this to make a connection to there. If this were an actual PCB, then it would be possible. Or you could have wires instead of these stupid ribbon cables and replace the connector on the motherboard and you'd be working. But really, the ultra cheap construction of this machine extends to this keyboard, which is one of the reasons why using the machine is kind of horrible, let's be honest, because this keyboard is bad. All right, well, we know that this machine works flawlessly and didn't even need any fixing whatsoever. So all that needs to happen now to this original ZX81 is I'm just going to do the mod to install composite video. So I'm going to go look up how to do that, and I'll let you know how it goes. So a little bit of Googling, and I found this excellent website that basically goes over the exact mod that I want to do to the ZX81. And reading through this blog, which talks about the two versions of ULAs, which we saw in both of these machines, it turns out the earlier version of the ULA that's in the ZX81 actually is not well suited for the composite mod. And that's because it doesn't have that little notch on the left side of the scan lines, which we saw on the oscilloscope. And it turns out that that notch is the back porch, or the part of the video signal that helps the monitor understand what the black level is. And it seems that the earlier ULA doesn't even have that, which means if you're trying to composite mod an older machine like this one that doesn't have that back porch signal, you have to actually create it yourself. Otherwise, a lot of connected monitors are going to have issues. Now, it turns out the community has come through, and this GitHub repo actually has the full circuit using a 555 timer to recreate the back porch, which will give you a composite signal that your modern monitor will understand. Of course, that means either creating the circuit on a perf board or having PCB mades, because this is an open source project. So because I didn't want to modify the original Issue 1 motherboard that's in the ZX81, this USA version, I decided to swap the motherboard that was in here and the one I had put back into this one after we'd repaired it. And this is the motherboard I took out of this case. And the Issue 1 motherboard is now inside of here. I put a sticker Issue 1 just to remind me that's where that stock unmodified motherboard is. Now the rest of this article goes on to talk about how to do the modification. And I think this person created a little circuit design and actually made a little perf board with all the components in it and installed it directly into the RF modulator can. And there it is installed. Well, since we had so few components in play, I decided to just do the mod myself, and I just did it dead bug style inside the can. So this is the circuit that I implemented inside the RF modulator can. So the signal comes off ULA pin 16, goes into the base of a 2N2222 transistor. It's connected to 5 volts, which happens to be this middle pin on the RF modulator. And on the emitter, it has a 100 ohm resistor to ground and a 220 ohm resistor to the RCA jack. I didn't even bother with the potentiometer. I just checked this from the oscilloscope and everything looked good. When I had something plugged in, it had 75 ohm termination. And I ended up removing these components from the motherboard, D9, R32, and R31. These are the extra components for the USA version of the board that were added in these positions. And then I just installed a little jumper link, you can just see it right there, that just bypasses over these components. It essentially hooks up pin 16 directly to the input to the RF modulator, which is this pin right here. So with those components installed, I can just put the cover back on, push that little plate back, and you'll be none the wiser that this has composite mod, but absolutely it should produce a really nice sharp video signal for any monitor or television plugged into this connector. And now it's time to reassemble the computer, which means I have to reconnect this very fragile cable one more time. Unfortunately, the cable is getting a little folded over, so hopefully it's making good contact in there. Otherwise, I'm going to have to try to do the rubber cement trick to it. All right, let's just give this a quick test, make sure all the keys are working. I think we don't have to do too much due to the fact it has rows and columns by just printing one row of keys and one column of keys. That should be good enough. Yep, seems like everything looks good and is working. There we go, all the screws are back in. There's the ZX81 looking much cleaner now that I gave it a little bit of a clean, and it should be working. So I've connected up the RetroTink, and as you can see, seems to have some issues. It starts out decently bright, the white background, but then it kind of fades away. I'm gonna go grab a composite monitor just to see if this particular issue is specific to the RetroTink 5X Pro, or if I picked the wrong resistor values for the voltage divider that was after the transistor buffer. So I hooked up a Philips composite monitor, and I must say that it does look kind of dim on there. But while the monitor is hooked up, I have a splitter cable, and we're looking at the video signal coming out of the computer. And you'll see that peak to peak is 1.03 volts, which is basically what I aimed for. And that's normal and correct for NTSC video when you combine the full sync pulse, which you can see there, horizontal sync pulses, plus the entire video range. I think what's happening though is that the active video range is totally non-standard for NTSC. I'm going to demonstrate with these cursors on the oscilloscope screen. So if I move these into position, it looks like the entire active video signal, which is this area here, excluding this pulse, is 368 millivolts. And looking at this article on Wikipedia shows that from the sync level, which is at 0 volts, all the way to the top of the video signal, the very brightest you can have is about 1.07 volts. The problem is this area. It should be 0.661 volts in the active video signal, and we're only getting 0.368 volts. So I need to swap out the 220 ohm that's on the output side and lower it down, because the peak-to-peak voltage I just saw for this needs to be 1.92 volts, and that will result in an active video signal about 0.661 volts. And unfortunately, this is just one of the issues with these types of machines. They just have such a non-standard video output. Luckily, I did not glue back on the feet yet, at least the ones that are under the screws, because I had a hunch that I might be doing this, and I probably should have done this test before I screwed this thing all back together. Hopefully I can access the RF modulator without taking the keyboard off again. Yes, I can. So there's the 220 ohm resistor. I need to swap that out. Well, you might have noticed there was a little bit of smoke there. That's because the emitter, which I was clipped onto with a black clip lead, one of these, well, it was touching the ground, and that was just shorting that transistor directly to ground. It was trying to drive to ground, which really damaged the transistor. So I took it out, swapped in a different one, and then I added this little adjustable potentiometer paralleled across the 220 ohm output resistor. So this is currently plugged into a monitor, so 75 ohm load. And currently the active video signal is at 396 millivolts, so slightly better than it was. That should theoretically, yep, it's raising the output level. All right, we are at 650. Let's just plug in the RetroTink and see what that looks like. All right, well, that looks certainly a little bit better, but let's still brighten it up slightly more. On the oscilloscope, which you can't see, we're at 690 millivolts. That seems fine. And peak-to-peak voltage around 2.04 volts, and the active video signal is about 690. So slightly higher than I thought, but that's totally fine. And the actual output resistance, about 71 ohms. So that's the 220 plus this adjustable potentiometer. So you could try using a 75 ohm resistor instead of the 220 for this resistor and leave that one at 100 ohms. Or put a 220 in and add an adjustment like I did there, just so you have some adjustability. Now, one thing I know for sure that I need to be careful about is I need to make sure that none of this touches any of the metal. So I think I'm just going to cut some paper and cover this up. So that way, even if this thing moves around slightly, I mean, it shouldn't. This stuff is all pretty firm. That way there's no shorts. And there we go. That just cut that out. So that's perfect. Doesn't really move around. Now I can reinstall the cover. Now, what we haven't tested are these 16 kilobyte RAM expansion modules. Let's just go ahead and test these. Now, as for seeing if they are actually working, that's a different story. I think I'm going to have to find a little program to type in, but just turning it on with this connected, if there's a fault, then I think it won't even start up the machine. So here we go with the first one. That one appears, oh, it worked. Let's try that again. So I wonder if this does a RAM check. Don't get that. It's curious how we have some static. I don't know what's up with that. Let's print some stuff to screen. It's interesting how entering a basic command takes a lot longer now. A small adjustment to the sampling profile in the RGB to HDMI was all it needed to kind of get rid of that static. Kind of strange that it wasn't there a second ago. Okay, well, the machine does seem to be working. It's kind of slow now, but it works. Let's try the next one here. Plug in the power. Very similar how we get the kind of black flash, and then it takes a while for the system to come good. And let's try this third one. Interesting is this one that I'm connecting now has a very, very firm connection. The other ones sort of were loose feeling. Not so much on this one. Okay. So on the surface, at least, it appears that all of these are working. I think the best way to test them is to actually load some software which requires 16 kilobytes. So I'm going to go figure out how to do that, and I'll do a jump cut. All right, so clearly the RAM expansion module is working because I loaded this game off tape, and obviously it works. This game, it takes up, oh dear. Oh no. It takes up all of the RAM. I think the file itself was about 16 kilobytes, and that coin thing is trying to get me. And I guess I need to pick up all the goodies. Don't quite understand the mechanics yet. It's funny playing games like this. There's no sound, because this thing has no sound support, right? Stay away. But the game, I mean, it's not bad, actually. Considering the performance we saw in BASIC, you'd feel that this would be a lot worse, but this is obviously written in assembly language. I think a biggest Achilles heel, again, is the keyboard. You can't feel what you're pushing. You have to really know the keyboard layout first. But it does allow multiple keys to be pushed at once, so that's handy. Okay. What is this? No. I don't know how I get over to the other side. Let's see, that's the end of the level. Okay, let's start again. Whoops. Oh, okay, that's cool. I wonder if I... Oh, did you see there was a little rocket icon there? Maybe that's what you have to pick up. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's get that. Whoa, no. Gotta avoid the coin. What a strange enemy. A coin. Okay, let's get this rocket here. Oh. Okay. Again, not sure. Obviously, if you bought this, you'd have the manual. Let's try that rocket again. I wonder if I need to have a running start. Oh, I totally missed it. No. Stay away. Oh boy. I think the name of this game is Super Rocket, something like that. All right. I wouldn't say it's reminiscent of Lode Runner, but kind of. Oh, no, go up. Okay, interesting. Okay, here we go again. Ah! So I think I know for sure that this RAM expansion works. I'm gonna draw a tick mark on the bottom, I suppose, just to help me identify which ones have been tested. So I'll put a tick mark there. Let's try this original matching ZX81 expansion module. So the way it works to load software, you type load and you put 2 quotation marks. I looked in the manual to figure that out. People who are familiar with the ZX Spectrum probably know that. This is exactly how it looks while it's waiting for software to load. I'm going to double click on WAV file, which will start loading it. And this is what it looks like while it loads. Now I tried using a phone, an Android phone that had a headphone jack, and it didn't recognize it. The pattern never changed from this. I'm gonna turn the volume down. So what I did is plug the output of my USB DAC, which is what I drive my speakers with, and I plugged that into the earphone jack on the computer. The earphone jack on the computer is the one that plugs into the earphone jack on your cassette player. So it's the input. And the mic connector on the computer is the output. That's what goes to your tape recorder for recording programs. According to the manual, it just simply said you'll see patterns of black and white stripes on your TV screen while it's waiting to load. And when it's detecting the data from the tape, you'll see thick, straight ones while the program is being loaded. All right, well, I guess what we're looking at there is what's working, because I've actually loaded several different programs for testing and they've all worked fine with the screen looking just like this. All right, there we go, it finished loading, and that's what's kind of cool. When the programs work, they generally just auto start. So this game is from the same people, Cosmic Cockerel, as the last one we were playing. So I wonder if the keyboard mapping is the same. It is QZ, BM, and the pound symbol, which is the space key. Do you wish to redefine your keys? Nope. Let's just start at skill level 1. I think this is a dig dug type game. Yep, I'm that guy digging. And I guess I'm trying to avoid stuff. So a little bit of static in the screen. That may be the RGB to HDMI. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. Whoa. Go down. There's like rats following me. How do I deal with them? Oh, the pound symbol. Oh, the pound symbol did something. Oh, that's so funny. They're digging. Oh, okay, I hit something. Not 100% sure what to do. Not sure if I'm supposed to pick up these rocks. Or not. There's a snake. Oh boy. Again, I probably have fun with this game back in the day. So yeah, it looks like pushing the pound symbol does something. Or, no, I don't know what it does. I thought I could kill those rats, but it didn't seem to. But what we do know for sure is that the ZX Spectrum RAM expansion module is also working, so that's awesome. So now just figure out which ones I've tested. So there's a tick mark, there's a tick mark. So those two work. It's just this one left. Let's see if this one works. Okay, there we go. Let's load our next game. It's going to take about 5 minutes. That's what it takes for a 16 kilobyte game to load. Now, while the game loads, I'm going to be careful not to touch anything here. I don't want to disturb it where it crashes. I do have a few tapes that Tim sent in. So we have Supermath, 16K of RAM, the Organizer, and Flight Simulator. Now, I did get a copy of this, a WAV file, so I don't need to use this tape. Looks like this was made by Scion in 1982, and it's listed under education. So even though this says Flight Simulator, it's probably not very graphical and pretty boring. The aspects of flying. The essential controls of an airplane include the joystick, flaps, and engine power. After loading the program, the computer will check it has loaded correctly by writing load check followed by passed if it has loaded successfully. If the screen shows load check failed, you must rewind the cassette and reload. The program will immediately start executing and will first ask you several questions. It will ask final approach, yes or no. The program will only execute the last stages of approach for a visual landing for you to practice the final touchdown. If you press the key M on the TS1000, the display will change to the map or chart of the runway and its environs. For an area of some 32 miles by 20 miles, the map shows 4 compass points north, east, south, and west. The runway lies in the middle. I suppose this is an actual flight simulator. There are the keys. Finished loading. It just says 00. That's not reassuring. Okay, there's something there. So we hit run. Anyone there? Does anyone realize what this is? It's 3D Monster Maze, which I saw someone playing a video of on this, and it didn't look too bad. Is this actually written in BASIC or a combination of assembly and BASIC? This is not a game for those with a nervous disposition. If you are in any doubt, press the stop if instructed. If you need to proceed, press list. Otherwise, press continue. Okay. Oh, there it is. It just takes a really long time. How do we move around? Ah, use the arrow keys. Okay. So it's a 3D Monster Maze game. That's not too bad, actually. I heard some good jump scares in this, although there's no sound, so don't get any jump scares from that. That was the wrong key. I meant to push. It's very sluggish. Footsteps approaching. Turn right. Okay. Uh-oh, run, he is beside you. Oh, there's a monster. You've been posthumously awarded 35 points and sentenced to roam the maze forever. If you wish to appeal, press stop, else press continue. Okay, I pushed continue. Rex lies in wait. Oh, he is hunting for me. Uh-oh. A little sound would be cool, but hey. ZX Spectrum added a little beep speaker that this thing does not even have. Okay, I see what I'm doing. I'm pushing the wrong keys. Forwards. Okay. Footsteps approaching. It sort of lags the game. It's responsive in one moment, and then I'm pushing forward, and I guess it wants me to read the messages at the bottom. I don't know how to get away from Rex. 3D Monster Maze. I guess I have more points. Nope. I'm pushing forward, and it won't let me move forward. Can I move back? No. I can move left and right, so I turned around. Weird. It works, though. Considering how slow and terrible this feels when you're in BASIC, the performance of this game Well, it's a little uneven, but it's surprising, I guess, shall we say. Okay, there we go. I was able to walk up to the wall, left, right. There was nothing there. Run, he's beside me. Whoa, get out of here. Oh, I got eaten. 60 points. All right, well, that tells us that this RAM expansion is working as well. So I'm going to give this a little tick mark. So ultimately, I would like to use this machine with the original RAM expansion just because that matches. And the final thing to do is to use some of this contact cement and have it drying on those. I need to put some on these spots and let it dry and then attach those feet. So the machine is connected to this monitor and I found a little bit of a problem. If I turn on the computer, I have it hooked up to an external bench power supply. The image looks great. There are some mild vertical jail bars, but I'm pretty sure that comes from the ULA and that's the same on every one of these. Image is rock solid and looks perfect. The problem happens when I plug in one of the RAM expansion modules. Turn this off, plug the module in and turn it back on, you get all this noise. I've tried all three of the modules and they're all the same. And I'm quite sure this is noise coming from the DC to DC converter that's inside the expansion module. If I alter the voltage, it's currently at 8.64 volts for my bench power supply, the noise changes dramatically. I'm going to change it in 0.1 volt increments. So you can get to like places where it's decent in the middle, but it's just at the top and the bottom. But when I was using the original power supply, the one that was plugged into the wall, it was especially bad. Like, look at that. We're at 10.44 volts, which arguably is a little bit high. But if we go down to like, say, 9.04 or 9.14, I mean, that looks absolutely horrible. The computer still works perfectly, though. There's no issues with that. It's just the noise on the video. Switch back to the power supply I was using. This one's actually a little bit less noisy than my bench power supply, but the bench power supply is very clean. It's a linear power supply. The one that's plugged in the wall right now is a switch mode power supply. And it actually looks a bit better, but it still looks pretty terrible. So that explains why I was seeing that shimmering on the RGB to HDMI, even though setting those thresholds appropriately made the image look perfect and got rid of any of this analog noise that's happening. Now, it's arguable that this could easily be bad capacitors inside of here, although I don't know. I find it unusual that these things operate properly, so the ripple and whatever's going on the video circuit here is not enough to cause any instability of the entire computer. So I'm very curious if anyone watching this has ever seen this particular problem where the external RAM expansion modules cause additional video noise where you wouldn't otherwise have had any. Well, with that, that's going to be it for this video on the ZX81/Timex Sinclair 1000. I come away from making this video with a bit of a feeling of surprise at how usable this machine actually is. I feel the biggest letdown with this computer is the keyboard. It is absolutely abysmal, and using it a little bit really didn't make it any better for me. The fact that you can't feel where the keys are means as you type, you have to look at every single key you push and then check the screen to make sure that it registered. It's pretty terrible. I'd definitely be curious to know if anyone who had this computer as their main computer back in the day got used to the keyboard and somehow were able to type quickly on it. It's unfortunate because the rest of the computer is actually quite capable considering the low chip count and the low cost of this machine. I mean, think about the fact that it's a CPU, a ROM, and a RAM, and one other chip, and that's the entire computer. That's kind of astounding. And it goes without saying that the initial price point of this machine at $99 when it launched in the United States back in 1982, and then the subsequent price reductions down to $49 and potentially even cheaper, allowed a lot of people to get this as their first computer to realize that they actually liked using computers. So there's a real place in history for this machine. And it's just, oh, it's so unfortunate. I wish that Sinclair and Timex had come out with maybe a slightly more expensive version back in the day that had a keyboard that had buttons on it. Even if it was one like the ZX Spectrum keyboard, it would have made using this computer so much more fun and less tedious. So this video's been fun playing around with this machine, running the games on it, and of course, getting these things up and running and figuring out what was wrong with them. They're so simple, there's really not a lot to go wrong with them, so clearly the troubleshooting process is relatively easy, and clearly they're pretty robust and reliable except for that keyboard membrane, which we know failed in this one. So if you enjoyed this video of me playing around with this thing, then I'd love a thumbs up, but if you didn't, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and a huge thanks to my supporters that make it possible to do this full time. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do it. And you know, the usual YouTube junk, comments, etc., etc., etc. And that's gonna be that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.